now we're going to switch. So in terms of the other programs that are out there, there's one called the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, which, as you and I discussed earlier, has changed a little bit. So I'm going to go through, yeah, just last night. So first question I'm going to ask, how does this apply, the wage subsidy, apply to most dental practices? I mean, I've seen the notes for businesses, but dental businesses aren't exactly the same as other small businesses. If people can't see us, we don't have revenue. So how do you think this applies to dental practices going forward?
It is an interesting question. So as we know, this subsidy will pay 75% of a staff member's wages up to $847 per week. Employers are strongly encouraged that if they can, they have to contribute that other 25%. That's great if you have an ongoing operation where you have people working and you're paying them. As we know, dental offices, for all intents and purposes, are not operating right now, as the RCDSO has strongly recommended that you don't. And in doing so, you would likely commit an act of professional misconduct. So most clinics are open on emergency basis only. My clients, some mixed bag. Some of them are doing emergency services. Some of them aren't, because it's not worth it for them to open up to do the emergency service. But for the most part, dental offices aren't operating. So it remains to be seen whether or not dental practices will be able to avail themselves of this subsidy. I'm not sure that's what this is designed for, to have people paid 75% of their normal wages when they're not doing any work at all. So when the RCDSO made their announcement back, I think it was March 15th, there was a mad rush amongst my clients to place their employees on layoff. Certainly there was an option to keep people on payroll, but that just wasn't the economic reality for most clients. So the majority of my clients currently have their employees on EI. And again, it remains to be seen whether or not they'll be able to transition them off of EI and onto this subsidy in circumstances where they're just not doing any work as it pertains to the dental clinic.
So a couple follow-ups I have to that is, because that's important for all of us. What is it, an all or none thing? Like, you and I kind of have had this conversation briefly, and I'd love your answer for all of our following dentists in Canada, is that, I'll tell you my situation. I have one staff member. I have two locations, and I have one staff member in both offices that is still on payroll at a reduced amount of hours. Could I put them on the 75% wage subsidy and leave my other employees on EI or the CERB, or do you not know? Is that answer been discussed? Or
I think the answer is you could bring back that person, just the one person, if you have them on payroll. Or, for instance, if once the subsidy is actually rolled out, you say to yourself, you know what, I do have enough admin work to do to have one person come in. I do believe that you can pick and choose which staff members go on to this, so long as that it's justifiable. Okay, that there's a real reason why you're bringing this individual back and allowing this individual to complete work. They will be able to get on that subsidy and get 75% of whatever they're paid for the work that they're doing.
So one more question about staff, and then I'll go to dentist on the wage subsidy. So if I have a staff member that makes more than, so $847, they'll pay 75% up to $847 per week. In the dental world, most of our employees make more than if you figure out what is 847 is of 75% of, most of them make more than that per week. Are you as an employer expected to make up the difference in the 25%, or also the 25% plus what they should make? So for example, we have hygienists. Their ranges in salaries are anywhere between $40 and $45. So if I pick the middle and someone makes $42 an hour and they work 35 hours a week, that's $1,470 gross per week. Are you expected to make up the difference between $1,470 and $847, or what is your understanding of that?
And again, that's an area where there seems to be some confusion, and it still stems from whether or not hygienists, for instance, will be able to be placed on this subsidy when they're not doing any work whatsoever. Right? So if someone, let's hypothetically say that you had enough emergency work to have a hygienist working in there full term, and she was working 35 or 40 hours per week or whatever, certainly you would have to pay that person for all the work that they're doing. Right? It's not as though you could say, okay, well, you've maxed out at $847. You need to keep working and providing services, but I'm not going to pay you another dime. So if the person was working, I think that they would max out at the $847. And if, for instance, they work up to $1,400 per week, I do think you'd have to cover that off. But again, the confusing aspect of it is if they're not doing any work whatsoever and you're paying them the 75%, should you have to pay them the extra amount based on their average weekly earnings? I don't think so. I don't think that's the way that this is going to go.
And then the last question is, many of us owner dentists are on payroll. Can we qualify for that 75% wage subsidy?
Classic legal answer, maybe. It's pardon?
I don't think the answer is known yet. That's why.
That's right. Exactly. I think it will likely function similar to the CERB in that if you're on payroll and you're actually deriving an income for work that you're doing during that period of time, arguably you could get the 75%. But if you're just paying yourself money to sit at home and do nothing as well, not that most dentists are doing that, I'm sure everyone's trying to keep busy, it remains to be seen. And also, of course, keep in mind that dental owners who are also on payroll will have some income coming in anyways through the business, even through collection of ARs, stuff like that. So whether or not you'll really qualify, I'm not sure. And again, if you do something to sort of manufacture a situation where you get to collect that 75%, I'd be a little leery about penalization for doing something like that. So by all means apply, but be careful in terms of how you organize your affairs to try and qualify.
That makes sense. I mean, you got to be fair. I mean, you can't be too abusive on the system. It's going to be uncharted waters. There's lots of information. And if, like I said earlier, if any of you have questions, we'll have some contact information for you going forward. And we will gladly do a second webinar with the answers to some of those questions, as we know, because it's changed. Every day this week, I read a dispatch that seems to be different than the one that was there the day before. So transitioning that, now we're going to talk a little bit about more employment in terms of our teams. So there's some questions I've seen. I've seen articles in the newspaper. I saw one in the Sun yesterday. If our team members have been laid off for 13 weeks, is it considered termination?
I'm going to give you another classic legal answer. Maybe. It depends, okay? So to go back to the start, as I said, when dental offices, for all intents and purposes, were shut down by the RCDSO, as I said, there was a mad rush to lay off employees. Certainly, I gave many of my clients the option to keep people on payroll, but as I said, that just wasn't the economic reality for many of my clients. So most of my clients moved to place their staff members on a layoff. Under the Employment Standards Act, employers are entitled to lay off their staff members for up to 13 weeks, okay, in a 20-week period. There's some confusion, is what I'll call it, out there right now in terms of whether or not, even though it's in the ESA, the Employment Standards Act, whether or not employers are actually entitled to do it. In a vacuum, let's hypothetically say that we weren't dealing with a pandemic that has shut down all the dental clinics across Canada. And you, as Main Street Dental, were just not doing really good marketing, for instance, and your profits were down, and you decided, you know what, I need to start making some changes and start cutting some fat somewhere. And you decided to lay off one of your staff members. Absent the contractual right to do it, a contractual right mirroring what's in the Employment Standards Act, historically, the courts have said that that may constitute a constructive termination of employment. Mm-hmm. And a constructive termination means the employer has made some fundamental change to the employment agreement that allows the employee to treat the agreement as it's over and then sue as if they've been wrongfully dismissed from their employment. That's a constructive termination. And as I said, the courts have historically said you cannot lay off staff members unless you pre-agreed with them in a contract that you have that right to do so. That's in normal circumstances, Okay. And that speaks to, you know, a situation where the dentist may have some control over what's going on in their business. Right now, no one has any control over what's going on. Okay. This has been a top-down directive that you have to shut down shop. So I think that creates an implied right in the employment agreement. And most dentists do at this point have written agreements with staff members. I'm starting to find some are better than others. But even if you don't have it explicitly in a written agreement, or you don't have a written agreement at all, it may likely still be an implied right of the employment contract that you can lay off a staff member in circumstances where your business has been shut down. Okay. And again, ultimately, you see a lot of information out there. You had mentioned the Sun. I think I've seen this in a number of publications. I've seen this in a number of communiques that have been sent out in the dental world saying you cannot do that. And I just think that that advice is a little too linear. It's not thinking outside the box about what's actually going on in dentistry right now. And so I take any of that advice with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And ultimately, again, you know, what choice do you have? So if you decide not to lay your staff members off because it could ultimately be considered a constructive termination, your only other option is to keep them on payroll, which is a non-option for most dental clinics right now.
Mm-hmm. It is. You know, we've got directives from above us.
At that point, I've done this with, at this point, hundreds upon hundreds of dentists over the last couple of weeks, assisted them in this process of placing the staff members on layoff. I am yet to get one client come back to me and say, you know what, my staff members are complaining about this. They're saying I don't have the right. What we're finding is that staff are being very cooperative with the employer and understanding that this is not a perfect situation for anyone.
No, I get
right?
it.
And so, I mean, is there some risk associated with it? Sure. There's always going to be some risk associated with any move you take with staff members. But I do think that that risk is pretty minimal.
Okay.